Today's class is going to be on Rudolph Schenkel's 1947 study on the expression studies of wolves. If you're new to the stream or to the class, be sure to watch them in order. It's okay if you're watching this now, but there's gonna always be references to classes we did earlier. We are in the ethology module right now, and the ethics module was before this module. So we want to make sure that we do things in order to get the most from this class, because I'm gonna be doing references based on this. Okay, let me go backwards here. Sorry, I was a little bit of technical issues, but I think we're okay now. All right, Rudolph Schenkel. This is an interesting topic because Rudolph Schenkel did a study in 1947 called the Expression Studies on Wolves. 1947. I do have it. You can download it off of the site in more than one place. I put a link in my notes over here, which you probably don't have it on your end in the live classroom, but when you go to the replay page, it will be there. But I got this study from Dave Mech's site. He had it in bits and pieces in PDF form, and I pasted them all together to make it available. So I encourage everyone to read the whole thing. It's not that long. I have the whole thing over here, and I'm certainly not going to read the whole thing during the stream, but I'm gonna tell you some points to pay extra attention to, which I think is important. Now, first of all, this study was it was originally published in German. There's not a lot of English versions floating around. Matter of fact, the only English version I was able to find was on Dave Mech's website. And it is a very misquoted study. And it's very significant to us as trainers for two reasons. One, it is an important study. It was the first study that I know of that really recorded the expressions of wolves. So by the expressions is their facial expressions, their body expressions, what they're doing with their tails in different circumstances as it related to wolves that they had different types of relationships to. So the information in here is gold. It is good information. The other reason why this study is significant is you need to know it. You need to know the source material. You need to read it yourself, because unfortunately, which is one of the reasons why we're doing this course, is it's not a regulated industry, and information is taken way out of context out there. And when good information is taken out of context, it can be harmful. It can be harmful to the dogs that you as a professional trainer are working with. It could be harmful to the owners of those dogs if information is taken out of context. So we definitely want to know this source information, and I want you to have your own opinion about it. Never believe something is true just because I am saying it. All right? Believe something is true because you've seen it with your own eyes and you've researched it yourself, which is why I'm pointing this to you. I did not do the studies. I'm just showing you some things to look at, form your own opinion here. Now, unfortunately, we do have to talk about some of the confusion out there, because it must be at least for a decade, the internet is flooded with all sorts of strange interpretations of what this study is about. So for starters, I just want to lay this on the table. Is once you start Googling Rudolph Schenkel, or you Google anything about alpha dog and dominance or anything about that in dog training, you are going to for sure come across a bunch of articles and videos about there being no such thing as an alpha wolf, or the dominance is a myth in canine behavior, and you cannot relate wolf behavior to dog behavior. I'm not going to get into all that right now. I just want you to know that it's out there, and I'm going to give you a few short things which can help you. Number one, I just want to make sure you know, before we even get into this, is that the whole thing about alpha wolf not being a thing, the only person who was ever quoted as saying alpha wolf is not correct, who is respectable, is on this subject, who actually does study wolves, is Dave Mech. And we are going to be talking about Dave Mech next in the coming in a coming unit. So I'm not going to go too deep into him, but I just want to give you this one tidbit. Just so you know, this study is specifically about wolves in captivity. And coming from David Mech's own mouth, I want to make sure you hear it for yourself, that he sees there is no problem with using this term with wolves in captivity. Just listen to this so we can throw it on the table here.
It's appropriate to use the term alpha in an artificial pack where you might put many wolves from different assemblages together, unrelated wolves and that kind of thing. Then they would form a pecking order or a dominance hierarchy, and you could call the top animal at that point the alpha. But that rarely happens in the wild, if ever, and so.
Okay, so I'm putting that on the table because what he's talking about is, yes, you can, when we're talking about captive wolves, we can use words like alpha and dominance and things like that. We're going to get into in new streams, in upcoming streams, about wild wolf behavior and its significance to us as dog trainers, which is different. Where that goes is, in the wild, it's usually two parent wolves that have puppies, and they just inherit the position of leading the pack. There's generally no fight to get to that position. There's not a lot of violence going on. But what we're going to talk about does have information about aggression as it relates to usually adult wolves of equal age that were thrown together. Now, this is significant because as dog trainers, we want to study ethology. We want to study the origins of our domesticated animal. There's nothing better to study with any domesticated animal than their wild counterpart. It's going to give us important information which unlocks clues to things that are sometimes difficult for us to interpret and in an artificial environment. So now we are not dealing necessarily with, as professional dog trainers, right, of dogs living on their own in family units, right? We're often doing more than just teaching obedience and teaching behaviors. We're often, very often, trying to decipher what is going on with a family that has multiple dogs that were not necessarily raised together, that came from different areas, different shelters, different breeders, and we get these crazy dynamics sometimes. And the Schenkels work really helps us to be able to unlock what is going on. It is our duty to be accountable for our claims as a professional. Now, I will give you an example. All right. This is how we know if we have a Schenkel deficiency or not. All right. Do we know the difference between, I'm going to show you some clips. Let's just watch these dogs' faces here. Do we know the difference between this?
Damien, a large and powerful rock.
Watch these dogs' faces. There's a wolf, same expression.
A large and powerful Rottweiler.
All right. Can we tell the difference between that and this?
You here? All right,
all right. Do we know the difference between what we've seen there and what we've seen there? All right. If you do not know the difference or can really explain what is different between the dogs here and the dogs there, especially if you don't know the context. All right. If we look at what's going on, we can probably make some guesses based on the context. But just by looking at the dogs' faces, and I use these two clips because we have a Rottweiler here and a Rottweiler here. Do we really know what the dog is feeling, and how that relates to who they're interacting with? If you are unclear, then yes, we have a Schenkel deficiency, and we could admit that, and Schenkels Study gives us the information that we need to be able to decipher between what we see here and what we see there. Now, if you don't know the difference, it can mean serious injury or mortal mistake to a dog or person. When we go into someone's home to help them, we need to know. We need to know why. First, we need to know is why an animal is acting a certain way. And if you don't know the difference between this and this, yes, it will mean failure. It will mean failure of your training plan. It can result, most likely result, in someone being hurt or an animal being euthanized or both. Right? So as a professional, and this is why we talk about ethics first, is if you're ethical, you need to be able to reference when your knowledge comes from. We cannot, if we want to be respected as a legitimate profession, we need to be able to reference our information and not just opinion articles or rhetoric or secondhand information or something we heard on YouTube. We need to see the source material, the actual studies. Don't take anyone's word for it, not even me. All right. So drilling this in, I put some notes here. As a professional, we cannot use rhetoric or what would be considered heresy in the true scientific community of ethologists. All right. So just because a veterinarian who happens to also be a trainer, or just because someone's on TV and trains dog, or they're a popular YouTube trainer or whatever, if you are using different terminology and saying things that does not reflect what is going on in the community of ethologists who study this, you are not right. It is heresy. You are negligent. So make sure you are consistent with the information that is out there. So things like saying dominance is insignificant. It is not. There's no such thing as alpha wolves. We got to be careful what we say, because even though a lot of these, even that quote we see from Mech talking about that scientists generally don't use the word alpha when talking about wild wolves. If you look at modern studies, because most of his claims were quite some time ago now, I think like a decade ago, they are still using this terminology in modern studies. We're going to get into that more in the next streams, but first we have to learn the significance of what we see in the Schenkels studies. Now, what we want to examine is what is the definition in ethology now and then. And you're going to see it written out in certain ways. But if we look through Schenkels' work, he's generally relating it to whoever is dominant, has mating rights, and freedom of behavior. They're not limited to what they can really do. If you read through the article, he's basically saying that if an animal is dominant, they have more choices of what they can do, and they're not as likely to be suppressed, right, by other wolves in this captive environment. In general, I would say, again, do your own research, but I read lots and lots of source material, and the easiest way, what I suggest your definition of dominance to simplify things, as a professional dog trainer, is simply the first right to a limited resource. So we know who is dominant in a certain situation by figuring out who has the first right to a limited resource that two animals equally care about, right? Like you can have an animal not care about something and there's really no competition, but if there's something two animals really like, it doesn't matter. Two dogs, two chimpanzees, two anything, two rats, whoever is allowed to have it, the limited resource is generally the dominant one. And remember, dominance is designed to prevent conflict. It's designed to prevent aggression. It is definitely not a training method. So this is one of those things, again, floating around in the amateur world and TV world and rhetoric world. Dominance is not a training method at all. And there is nothing in here in this article about training methods from Schenkel, right? We're only talking about what it is from an ethology point of view. Later, we can apply that to our training plans. Understanding what it is, we can apply that to training plans, but dominance in no way has anything to do with our mechanics and alpha rolling dogs and doing anything that the dogs do to each other, right? We're not going to lift our leg and pee on things or mount the dogs or throw them to the ground or physically fight the dogs. It has nothing to do with that. That is not what this is article about. So once people that don't read this, if they want to think, oh, this is about dominance and this is about some sort of training method, they're going to throw out the baby with the bathwater on this one. And they're not going to read it. They're not going to see the importance of it. So it's not about training method at all. Now here's, let's see, where are we? Now, what this publication work is not, yes. Okay, it's not training advice. It is not a claim of wolves' behavior in their natural environment. I have to stress this because I do not want anyone who listens to this to be like, oh, this is that study that was debunked because wolves do not actually act like this in the environment. This study is not, it is from the study, you cannot debunk anything that was never claimed. If anything, Schenkel debunked himself anyway. Right in the beginning, right after the intro, he says, first of all, the study is based on the expressions of wolves in captivity. It's right in the title. Also, at this time the time that he wrote this is his own words. He says, thorough studies of the sociology of the wolf outside of captivity do not exist. This was in 1944. All right. And then he referenced Young and Goldman's work, which was not complete, it says an exact treatment of the sociology of the wolf cannot be found, but he says in view of the partly controversial accounts of various zookeepers, this gap is especially evident. He is admitting that we're missing information on here. And he also says he's trying. The only information that he has that he believes is a possibility is exactly what we're going to learn about and what Dave Mech talks about. I mean, Dave Mech takes the, he takes over to find out, he fills in the gaps. That's what scientists do, right? We don't know how wolves act, what their behavior is in the wild. Mech does that, but he did not debunk what was going on with Schenkels, all right? Schenkels said, he references Young and Goldman from some observations in 1944, and he says the parent animals form the center of a tightly closed family with their own area, live in a monogamous permanent union. This family encompasses the young animals until they reach reproduction age. So that a family, a pack, encompasses generally a pair of wolves and their yearlings or 2-year-old offspring. And this is exactly what Mech confirmed, all right? So now keep in mind, Mech could not have done, he heavily references Schenkels' work. Matter of fact, this copy that I have is Mech's. And if you look through it, there's like notes, there's pencil drawings on it, which I'm assuming was from Dave Mech. So now Dave Mech did not have to study the expressions of wolves. He got to read, he benefited from Schenkels' work and then was able to use this work to observe wolves from a distance in the wild and then further interpret what is going on. And again, in the summary, I know I might be beating this to death. We just want to make sure that everyone knows that this is not something that ever claimed to be a study of wolves' natural behavior, that it was always meant to be a study of wolf behavior in captivity, which there's benefits to learning about wolf behavior in captivity. And so a start of an order, he says, a start of an orderly description of observed expression phenomena of wolves in captivity. It's in the summary. And he says that there's limitations, obviously, but he said, which I agree with, the functional limitation of expression came to the fore as being the most useful. Expression as a function of living together. So the benefit from this study is there's a big benefit of this study of learning how our domestic dogs' wild ancestors, how they generally communicate when they're living together in these unnatural environments. This I cannot stress how beneficial this is to us as professional trainers to read it, to absorb it, and to know that this can relate to what we are dealing with even more so than what we're going to see in Mech's studies, all right? The problems, the issues, the increased aggression that we see in the captive environment of these wolves is significant to understanding why we often deal with increased aggression inside of certain households with mixed families of dogs that are coming together. We're going to look at Mech's work to see, how it's supposed to be. Mech's work is going to be great to see in the wild. Yes, there's definitely less aggression within the family unit. And we want to try to mimic that as much as possible in the artificial environment, right? There's a lot of solutions when we look to Mech. Mech's work is great stuff, but Schenkels' work is great stuff. And you need to know them both to get the full picture. So some things we're going to go over here. There's so much stuff to talk about. I'm going to go over some highlights, some interesting things that I found in here, which I've also found. I mean, if I'm going to take my own experience, working 28 years as a professional and helping other professionals with problems that they're dealing with client dogs. some interesting things that he found, which is that conflicts usually, at least in this environment, were between same sex conflicts, that the males and the females were usually having the conflicts with each other, not as much with each other. Also, what I found interesting is that he noticed that both sexes needed to be present for there to be increased conflicts within the sexes, right? So if you had a small group of males just living together by themselves, or just a small group of females living together by themselves, there was less conflict. But if you have males and females together, there's going to be more conflict between the males and between the females. So this is going to be, as we learn to troubleshoot, see what's going on. Every time you see, so if someone's been observing canines for a long period of time, this can help us to troubleshoot an issue, right? Where someone has a couple of male dogs living together, and then there were no issues, and then they bring a female dog into the home, especially if if they're intact and they're going into heat and stuff like that. Now we may have the males fighting with each other. The same thing. We may potentially have the same issue with females. So we have references that can help explain potentially why this is happening, that it's being observed, in the ancestor of our domestic dogs, and it could help explain what's going on inside the home. So there's interesting tidbits in here. He does talk about the communication is more than just this body language, but there's visual and vocal. But he said that the optical communication tends to be the dominant form of communication. So, when we say things like dogs smell fear and all this sort of stuff, like this reflects what I've seen as a professional trainer, is they are much more paying attention to what they see. To what they see in body language tends to be the most important to them. There's lots of expressions. There's all kinds of things. Let's move along over here. So first thing, I pasted some stuff right from the study over here to make things easier, is he talks about the presentation of the anal region, scent-wise and optically, as well as control in the anal region indicates social rights. So right away, we're like, oh, what is this anal region about? When I first read it, I was like, what? What's all this anal region stuff? And then I realized that what he was talking about, I remember this is a translation from German to English, and it helps make more sense. He's really talking about the tail over here, about the tail, where the presentation of the anal region is when they're lifting up their tail, and the other dogs can see and smell the anal region. And so he was talking about that in the bitch, control is seldom observed and presented may only be seen in the winter. So in his observations, that the females were not with this mixed group of males and females, they were not presenting their anal region as much. But it was mostly the males, except for when it was breeding time. And the withdrawal of the anal part from control, on the other hand, and lack of control initiative, on the other hand, is what you saw with subordinate males. So mostly the males were not presenting it; they were withdrawing it when inspected, and pretty much all the females, except for when it was time to mate. And then you'll see the high-ranking females were holding up the anal region more, making an effort to hold it up. So this is in the Schenkels stuff. And now, why we cannot just say dominance does not exist or hierarchy does not exist? It's impossible to interpret this stuff. Why one is tucking its tail, one is holding it up, if we don't know how these relate to each other, right? So this one, when we see this body language, has more freedom to do what they want. freedom to mate, freedom over first right to limited resources. So significant. And this is pretty basic. Um, most people, if you spend enough time around dogs, you just through context, you know what this is about. Also, interesting things in there. He mentions that you're more likely to see this with new greetings when they're unfamiliar with each other. You see less of this with canines that have been living together for a long period of time. Um, and in the study, I don't have the notes over here, you have to read it for yourself. It is based mostly off of several years observing wolves in zoos from different areas that were put together. Matter of fact, two different species where there were some gray wolves, which are larger, and red wolves, which are smaller. And I believe they came from three different zoos, and they just threw them all together. So it was a mixed pack. But he was also studied some dingoes, a pair of dingoes, and domestic dogs too, in different environments. All helped to shape what he saw in the study. Although the majority of it is based off of what he saw with this mixed group of wolves. Moving along here. Urine marking. He talks about urine marking. Significant. This is going to be significant, and we're going to relate this to what we're going to read in Mech's work too. As he noticed, remember, these are objective. He's just recording what he saw. He's recording when he saw dogs marking. He called it the urine ceremony, and how it related to the ones that were doing this. And he said that it was not just olfactory, but again, it was optical. That these wolves were making a point of showing the other wolves that they were doing this, that they were marking their territory. And he sees that it was related, and I'm assuming these are Mech's notes over here. He put 1, 2, 3, and 4. Territory marking with free-living wolves in summer, and separately kept domestic dogs throughout the year, making acquaintance, as above, pair formation and introduction to pairing with wolves in winter, legitimizing the lead wolf. Constantly with captured wolves held in packs, but most evident in the winter, presumably too with free-living wolves in the winter. This function is also discernible in domestic dogs. Said with both sexes, it is clearly evident that along with the social aspect of the various forms of anal expression, the optical function always remains in the foreground. Right? So the visual of this is very important. So what he was saying is we're going to get much more, I believe, a much more accurate feel for what the territory is about by going into Mech's work. But what he did see is that this is related to higher ranking wolves that had more freedom, that were more dominant from an ethology point of view. A lot of the stuff anything he talks about with free living wolves, take with a grain of salt. We get better information from David Mech. But it definitely was associated with the higher ranking wolves. Next, very important, and this is going to help us with our question above with the Rottweiler. Can you tell the difference between this and this? Is he believed the head was one of the most important aspects of expression with wolves. And you're not always even going to you see those videos we were watching, a lot of those, we get a video of something going on, we need to interpret it. We're not even going to get the whole body, but the head is front and center when canines are interacting with each other. So some basics of what he recorded is that, and here we have like a relaxed wolf, recorded what like a relaxed, self-assured wolf would look like. But then we have expressions. When one was being more threatening and more confident, its muscles on its head tend to wrinkle. And we could see over here in this one, it tended to wrinkle and pull forward. and the ears tended to come forward, out, and forward. The more all the muscles came forward. The teeth, less teeth are bared, but you see less of them. Everything over here is pulled forward. Now, the less self-assured the canine is, the more things get pulled back. And the forehead gets flattened. All right. So instead of it being wrinkled, the forehead gets flattened. So you can see between this one and this one, it gets flatter. The lips go back. The less self-assured they are. When they show aggression, you're going to see more teeth, more of the gum line is going to come back. The less self-assured that they are. So this gives us, so this was years of observation. And here's some more charts. And this is from his work over here. Same thing. These are just different angles. We see from the front. We see wrinkling and forward. Over here, we see like sort of like a neutral, self-assured dog. And we see this pushing forward. But we see with dogs that are less confident, more anxious, everything goes back. The eyes get more squinty. The ears start to flatten backwards against the head. And this is from his work over here. The bite threat posture is preparatory to biting, which is ritualized into an impressive grimace. In superiors, the body shows an impressive or threatening posture. This is usually that straight, straight up on their legs, usually leaning forward. Tense trembling of the tail, as well as the stretched out legs and bristling of the back hairs increases the threatening character. The eyes stare and the ears are raised up and turned outward slightly. All right, the focal point is the teeth. It says accompanied only in high status wolves by continuous grumbling growls, which sometimes with rhythmic thrusting of the tongue between the teeth, slightly fluctuate in tonal color. The whole expression, behavior in high status wolves creates the impression of high explosive readiness. So we're going to move up over here. Let's go revisit over here. Let's see. I'm going to have to go backwards a little. All right. This helps kind of decipher a little bit what we're seeing here. Right? So we're going forward. This is pull forward. We're seeing the front of the mouth.
Large and powerful rock.
Same thing here, a little poodle. So it's good. Wolves are great to study because it's the genetic blueprint. Once we start domesticating animals, we can't tell much anymore by the ears, right? This poodle, even the Rottweiler, it's harder to tell. But we can look at you can see the lips pulled more forward, the stare is more forward, the head coming forward. All right. There we go. It's much easier to tell with this guy.
A large and powerful rock.
All right. Now, what do we see here? I see art. Got it. And this one is less self-assured. Watch this one.
You here?
Much more gum line. The ears further back. This is much further back, but it's not extreme. It's really not it's not extreme, but it's much less self-assured than what we see over here. So this helps us get into the dog's psyche, think how they're really feeling. And this would be considered more of a protest. This would be much more of a threat. These ones are much more likely to hurt you. And we're going to get into what this one is more likely to do. But see this? Lots more gums.
All right, Alfred. You hear?
Now, does that mean he's not as likely to get bitten? Not necessarily. Probably different types of bites if he's not careful. A dog can bite for different reasons and in different states. So read the study. He talks about the different types of attacks and the different types of bites in the study. So, for example, and I've seen it, and some of you, through your own experience, can be like, oh, that makes sense. So the more submissive a wolf is compared to another wolf, the more likely, if they're uncomfortable in a situation and they're protesting, they're less likely to bring their mouth closer to who they're protesting, and their lips are going to be further back, and they tend to air snap more, and often sometimes don't even make a noise, clap their teeth together. And I know this with some of my own dogs that I've had in the past, where there was something they didn't really like, and I had to pick them up or put them somewhere, and they would flop over, so I was on their back, and they would start chopping at the air, and I knew they weren't really challenging me. It was a protest. These were like protest snaps. Where a dog that is more serious, a canine that's more serious, and everything is pulled forward, and it is a threat, they're much more likely to injure you and to put their mouth on you and to do a more serious bite. So that's a nutshell version, but read what's in the study for yourself and relate this to things that we're seeing. Now, very important, because we use this stuff so we don't misdiagnose things that are going on. This talks about dominance and hierarchy and alpha, and you should not debunk this stuff. What you should do is learn what it really is. If someone is going to try to debunk something based off what they see on TV, or someone thinking alpha and dominance theory is about being tough with a dog or techniques or not taking no crap, that has nothing to do with what we have over here. The reason why it's important to know what this is we want to know that a dog, when I posted the one with the Rottweiler getting his nails clipped on my Facebook page, and I just wanted to see, these are just followers, they're not all dog trainers, some are dog trainers, and I wrote, who can tell me what they see here? I got a decent amount of people responded to it, and just about, I think everyone wrote that the dog was dominant. A dog was dominant, and the owner needs to show the dog who's boss or not tolerate that. There was one person that I know that said, yes, the dog is being fearful. And it just happened to be one of our trainers on here that read the Schenkels Study for herself. It was Allie from I know. I don't know if anyone else went on there. So why is that important? Is we're going to do two different plans depending on what it is. There's the dog with the nails clipped, that's a fear-based issue. That's very different from a dominance-based issue, which the dog is thinking differently. We're going to need to train the dog differently, which is out of the scope of this stream, but I promise you it has nothing to do with force, right? It has nothing to do with force or alpha rolling or things like that. It's like, if you don't know why the dog is acting that way, we can't make a plan. We can't make a proper plan. And if we make the wrong plan, if the dog is truly threatening you because they feel they have the first right to a limited resource, or they feel that they deserve to have the freedom to do whatever they want, and then you try to do a technique that might be designed more for a dog that's feeling fearful, you can just feeling fearful, you could potentially get someone hurt really badly. And you can get the dog euthanized. So know your stuff. The tail. This is awesome. If we write off Schenkels' work of being insignificant, we're going to miss out on all this good stuff about the tail. Now, there's no canine better to study for tail information than the wolf, because the wolf has a whole tail the way it was supposed to be. We can't study tail movements by looking at a pug or even a husky or a lot of these other dogs. If we look at what the tail is doing when it was in its natural state, it helps us to interpret the variations, the endless variations we see in our domestic dogs that happen to have a functional tail, right? So there's a lot going on with the tail. And he stressed in this study that there's endless combinations and variations in between. He was just trying to give us some basics to start off with. And I put some notes over here, right? So the high tail, which is showing the anus, right? It's a self-confident canine during social interactions. Now this one right here, not a lot of people don't know what this is, where it comes out and there's like a notch in the tail. This is when they mean business. It's a threat towards another wolf in this case, but I have seen this many times. This, by recognizing this, you can save a lot of dog fights from happening. I've noticed it before I ever read Schenkels Study, just through experience, dealing with lots of dogs and putting dogs together. I noticed with dogs that had a tail that right before that they would scrap, a lot of them would stick out their tail like that. Yeah, you'd get a little notch in it, depending on so it's kind of out like a pin, and there's like this little notch, and it would happen usually just before a fight would break out. And this information over here is good. It's in Schenkel observed this too. And we're more likely to get this information, yes, when we put a bunch of adult wolves together that are not in a family unit. There's going to be more scrapping going on. You're going to be able to see these expressions more. And this one, this is a still photo, but it's a little more poofy, and it portrays an imposing attitude where it's often seen with a wagon, basically. And then we have a relaxed state. Then we have an uncertain threat where it's coming out a little bit. We got other modifications of relaxed where it comes out more, and when the base is very just straight down, he was referring to the dogs that were more in a depressed state. And we have poofy and coming out a bit, like more defensive, less confident. And over here towards the bottom, we have much more submissive things, and he called it self-deflation, where the wolf was making themselves smaller, curling their body under. This one looks like it's supposed to be wagging. Like it's supposed to be wagging, approaching submissively to a superior wolf. And this is extreme submission. You see the tail all the way down underneath the belly over here. So he was recording this. And this is not from his illustrations over here. And I'm still trying to find the source of this. I pulled this offline. I see this floating around at a few different places. But I like this because it shows head and tail. And Schenkel does have, if you go to his study, the only one that we have here, I have all his illustrations in here. So I found like basically refurbished ones. And he does explain that generally the head and the tail go hand in hand with each other. Like more confident postures on the head will reflect what's going on in the tail. So he has lots of illustrations. The illustrations were not translated, although he refers to them, and they're very hard to read, but he does it's referred to in the text, but the little captions are in German. So if someone knows German, which I know we do have some members, at least one member I know of that could speak German, could probably tell us exactly what's being said here. So you can find a lot of the raw stuff over here in the study. And over here, he was showing how head and tail often reflect each other, right? This is confident posture up here, more confident back there too. More submissive in the front, more submissive in the back. So there's a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of stuff in the back of the study over here. All kinds of expressions. This was just expressions, nothing debunked. This is what he saw. This is what he saw. And so here it gives us some examples now, all right? So this makes more sense. This is similar to the Rottweiler we see in the video at the top of the notes, where with the Rottie, right? We have forward center of gravity, tail up, everything forward. Here goes our threat, the pin tail, everything forward. This is a very confident, aggressive pose. This is the tail that was wagging. It's going to go along too with confidence. And this is a dog of mixed feelings, suspicious, right? Not quite submissive, not quite very confident, ears turned slightly, eyes slightly backwards. There's all kinds of combinations. This one we could see is more of a defensive. So this dog is threatening, but if you look at its body posture, ears back more, tail is down more. This is a dog eating. And here we got some more subordinate posture, defensive, tail is down, showing aggression, ears back. And this too shows reflection of these three down over here, right? Where we have subordinate attitudes, where the tail's down. This looks like it's a wagging tail of a dog approaching in a subordinate way. Here goes one being very, very, very submissive. Everything pulled back. So let's watch some video examples over here. Now, these are kind of cool. I use these in 4.0. It helps put some of this together. Now, this first one, let's see what we got. Let's just watch it first. It's a short video. I pulled these all off of YouTube. Here, what we're going to say before I play it is no one is telling me no one's telling me this video what wolf has more freedoms, who has first right to limited resources. But because of Schenkels' work, we're able to tell quite a bit over here. So what looks like is this wolf is either grooming or trying to get the attention for interaction of this wolf that's lying down. And then the one that's lying down seems to have enough of it, doesn't want it done anymore, and shows aggression towards this particular wolf. Then a bunch of things happen here, which are kind of cool. It may be outside of the scope of this lecture, but we'll talk about it anyway. Why not? Let's watch it. So now what we can see, it looked like this wolf was, it was grooming, or who knows, could have been picking things off of the other wolf, cleaning it, could have been dried pieces of meat. Who knows? That part I don't really know. But it looked like whatever it did either hurt, was too strong, something. But this one has had enough. Its posture, even from here, we can see its ears are forward, its tail is up and imposing and moving back and forth. We see a tucked tail. We see high-pitched vocalizations. Read the Schenkels study for yourself. This all goes along with a wolf that expresses themselves in a submissive way. And it's funny, you never hear about submission being debunked. but you hear about dominance being debunked, right? You can't have submission without dominance. So this reflects what he saw in his studies of captive wolves. And look, these are captive wolves. And it could possibly help us with captive domestic dogs. All right, so lower tails. You look at this one over here, right? We got ears slightly back. There's another one over here that's stepping in. So there's actually, between these 4 wolves over here, we can actually get a lot of information. So that seems to be the end of it, but just because it's interesting, why not? We have, because we are going to go into other body language, but since this one's so interesting, we're going to see one wolf when this breaks out start scratching itself, which is known. There's lots of written material and observations about this scratching being sort of an avoidance behavior, like, oh, I don't know what's going on, I'm just over here scratching myself, sort of a way to stay out of things, or a calming signal. We have this other one that comes, and we talk about it in the protection training and stuff like that, tries to do a splitting behavior. It's trying to be a peacemaker in the situation, and is also doing shake-offs, and I bet it is doing sneezing too. I bet it's also sneezing, which is a way to diffuse aggression too. But look at all the stuff that's going on over here, right? This one picking, licking, something annoys this wolf. We're gonna hear it almost make like a little painful noise. All right, so we got all this forwardness. Look at this. This one starts scratching itself. It's like, oh, I don't know what's going on, I'm just over here scratching. All right. This one's going to come in and try to be a peacemaker and split.
Get him.
And it's coming in a submissive way. And what's interesting too is you will see this behavior when we watch videos, which there's plenty of videos of people being silly and like pretending they're smacking their kids, right? And then like the golden retriever does the same behavior, trying to get in between them. Shaking, that one's doing shaking. That one managed to split them up. Now this one shows we can get a good idea of the relationship between these. This one tends to keep a dominant posture over this one and uses threats just to keep it away from the other one. There's a lot of thinking going on here. You say, wants to keep it away from the other one. So it's interesting. It's good stuff. But Schenkel gives us insight to this. You would not be able to read this stuff without Schenkels work. And when you do, there's books out there. There's great books out there that show illustrations and body language. But I assure you, 99% of books that you've seen that are published by authors about dog body language did not do the sitting around watching all this stuff. They started off with a base of using illustrations that were handed down, refurbished, redrawn from Schenkel. This one. Now this one right here shows this is an issue with wolves in captivity. Watch these two. So what happens here in this video is we have a woman, a caregiver to these captive wolves, enters the enclosure, and it seems as if one wolf is upset about the other wolf having access to the zookeeper, which is probably associated with good things, food, pet, wolf massages, who knows? But there seems to be something about her that triggers a conflict. And the body language here is very interesting. And it can also give us insight to potential issues when we are dealing with dog on dog. Matter of fact, this for sure, I'm not going to say it might, it will. It gives you insight to issues some people have when it comes to dog on dog aggression within their home, especially when it comes to aggression over the owner's attention, which I've dealt with a lot. There's a common trigger where dogs in the same family would sometimes get into fights over who gets the owner's attention. When the owner's given one attention, the other one will show aggression towards it. Or if one tries to approach the owner first before the other dog, there becomes a conflict and a fight breaks loose. But this one's particularly interesting. I'll show you why. Let's watch it. So see, they're all very neutral right now. They're just relaxed, panting. So now we got...
It's okay. It's okay.
All right, this is not my words. She put that there, but it's true. Now what we got here gives us insight to what's going on. All right, we got the tail up. This one has its tail down, but not very, very down. And its body is not very deflated. In Schenkels' study, he shows diagrams. So this is called teeing off. So this right here is an expression to also assert that I have first right to limited resource. And I hope you know it. But if you watch this just shows that there's a range in behavior, which is one of the things we get from Schenkels' work, that this dog is not showing extreme submission. Matter of fact, if we watch it, it's showing submission, but really not extreme. Its ears are not that far back. It's even toying with the idea of putting its head over the back of this wolf's withers. So even though this one is asserting itself, this one is not necessarily asserting itself, but it's not really showing extreme submission to this one. And matter of fact, it walks away without doing it, which seems to trigger more aggression. watch here, while there's increased aggression, his tail's actually up. His tail's actually up. We have some back and forth going on here. All right, so could there be a potential problem here? Now remember, this is wolves in captivity. We're going to go into Mech's work, and you're not going to have these problems like this in a natural pack. Mostly because you're not going to have equal age, older, same-sex wolves generally competing over the same resources. But this is significant when we're dealing with pets, because yes, you will get clients that have 3 intact Rottweilers that live together and a couple females. You're going to have things that mimic what we see in these captive wolf environments, and it gives us a clue that this behavior is natural if we have the wrong pairings of ages and temperament types in certain situations. We need to understand why, or look back to the undomesticated version for answers to know if we're fighting Mother Nature and what we can fix easily, what's going to take management, and help us to figure out what type of training are we going to have to do, and often what are the triggers. Triggers are big. There was definitely a trigger in this situation over here that caused this, but you can see the dynamics in this unnatural captive pack are not good. I got one more for you. There is I noticed in the Schenkels study, that there's talk about, and this is one thing to question. This is my opinion, because I'm trying to remember, you can't take everything as fact, all right? You take everything. This is what he observed. He observed that wolves, higher ranking wolves, would stalk and pounce the lowest ranking wolves in the pack. And I have seen, and to the point where the harassment sometimes even resulted in the death of the lowest ranking wolves. Also, keep in mind that in Schenkel's pack, it was the larger gray wolves and smaller red wolves. And the smaller red wolves, it sounded like, were the ones that were definitely on the bottom of the pecking order in his study. And what he describes to me sounds like this stalking and pouncing behavior sounds like, I say, it brings to the surface issues you may have dealing with a domestic dog. To me, it did not make sense in any way that it involved anything about a contest over limited resource or anything that would fit the definition of dominance. And what it did seem to me is to be a side effect of living in captivity. This is opinion, all right? This is not something expressed by Schenkel, but I have heard, I'm saying this because I have also heard people quote from his study about that there's always a scapegoat in a pack that always gets picked on, which is usually the lowest ranking. I did not find any information. We're going to go into Mech's work about this behavior happening unless I missed it in naturally occurring packs. It seems as if this would be happening. That wolf that's getting beat up all the time would disperse. To me, the behavior seems to be caused by having these wild animals that have an instinct to hunt and stalk and protect territory, having nothing to hunt, which can be potentially related to when someone has a domestic dog that was bred to hunt or do something, and then it finds an outlet within the home, chasing after the children's ankles, chasing after, getting obsessed about chasing after the cat or things like this. I have a video that shows the same phenomenon over here that I put. It seems like the exact situation that Schenkel describes. Now, just you can see how unnatural this looks, this situation. So here is a wolf showing very submissive body posture. It seems to recognize that it's getting stalked. So watch this. We can see there were these wolves stalking. To me, it looks very similar to predatory behavior that we even see that is enhanced in domestic dogs like border collies and stuff like that, that stalk sheep. They are doing the same posture, stalking, and then it turns into, in my opinion, like a mock hunt. And I've seen similar behavior watching documentaries of wolves doing this behavior, chasing after coyotes and things like that, other canines on their territory, and ultimately killing them. Watch what happens here. It's not easy to watch. The wolf does survive. So what I see here is a lot of non-threatening behaviors, sort of silent hunting type behaviors. When predators swarm an animal. And ultimately, yeah, the excitement seems to die down. And it looks like they may have been started leaving them alone at the end here, or maybe not. No, it stops there. So interesting. You will find reference to that inside of the Schenkels study too. So what I'm going to close with for this one is read it. Is read the Schenkels study. It's in our knowledge base. Know its importance. It was the first of its kind. There's nothing fundamentally debunked about it, although it was written in an objective way as a starting point. He says it's a starting point. I just showed you something that I question, right? There's things that we can always question, but there's obviously a lot of good information on there. And a video you could watch on your own, as I found a kind of cool video. It's meant to be funny with a bunch of chihuahuas showing aggression. Let's see, I'll shut off the volume for this. Is you could probably find at least 3 or 4 different motivations for the chihuahuas in these videos showing aggression. And does the Schenkel work help us? Help us to decipher what's going on, how the Chihuahua feels in these situations, and how important is it for us as professional dog trainers to not just make blanket statements and say, okay, this is all just based on fear, which you'll hear. It's like, oh, these are all just fearful. And that's the reason for it. We want to know what it's thinking. It really will help us to attack the source of the motivation for the dog's behavior. Some in this video are going to be fear. Others are definitely going to be conflict over a limited resource. Some are going to be predatory. All right. These are going to be funny. We're going to have some stuff with resource guarding, which we're going to talk about in the Mech work, which is interesting and it deserves a lot of talk by itself. But there's all kinds of cool. It's a cool video to watch. Right? It's meant to be something funny, but watch this one over here. This little Chihuahua guarding the remote controls here. You know, what kind of body language are we going to say from these? What's going on? It's a 9-minute video that shows all types of situations. Funny with Chihuahuas, but not so funny when it's a German Shepherd in someone's home, or Rottweiler, or Malamute, or any large dog. But look through them and see what you can see. It's not as easy on a Chihuahua to see the subtle differences as, say, a wolf. Even though there's much, try picking the stuff out on a pug, right, or a Pekingese. It's going to be much harder. But that's why we study the wolf. We get the full picture. We get the original blueprints that we modified. And Schenkels Study is great. It deserves to have its rightful place in a dog trainer's education. It's a piece of history. So that's all for today. Thanks for coming. I'll see if there's any big questions over here. If I messed up on the stream over here, I see good info here. Art knows his stuff. I think we're good. All right, I'll be back Wednesday.